We're going to start with a Moscow police report by Corporal Corbin Smith. And he was one of the first people to enter into that house. And we read some of what he had reported a few hours ago. But this is him going back to the station and writing up his report, remembering what he saw when he found the bodies of Ethan and Xana. I observed a female wearing a sweatshirt and underwear laying in the middle of the bedroom floor covered in blood. I observed deep lacerations indicative of defensive wounds on the female's hands. The female was surrounded by blood on the floor. I observed the male laying on the bed. The male appeared to have suffered from stab wounds and a laceration to the neck. The male was covered in blood, and the bedding around him was soaked in blood. Jack Rice, if I'm Xana's loved ones, just hearing this, defensive wounds, multiple stab wounds laying there on the ground.
Ted, this is absolutely nothing short of brutal. These are the most brutal kinds of murders that we ever come across. As a prosecutor, as a defense attorney, I've handled multiples of these kinds of murders myself. And you realize that, sometimes we talk about the victims. And when we talk about the victims, people are imagine those who are actually the targets of that violence, the targets of those crimes. But you also realize that in a case like this, you get these concentric circles, just like dropping a stone into a pond, and these victims get larger and larger. It's the families who have really came to the top that we saw in the last couple of days, who've been voicing their loss, their theft, and you realize just how brutal this was. And these are the visions, the thoughts that will stay with these families forever. When we're all moved on to different cases, when Kohberger drops into the silence of the criminal justice system, never to be seen from again, these families will wake up every day and remember their children, as they should.
But I just have to jump in and say, listen, not only that, but Ted, they're going to learn so much about the fact that this was not a person who broke into a house and got startled because there were people in the house and he didn't expect it, and I'm going to stab him and steal things. We knew he hadn't stolen anything. We knew some of that. But to hear these details just underscores how deliberate, how planned, how specific, how brutal, how all of those things come together to tell us a little bit more about who Bryan Kohberger is. If we could, Phil Harvey is also joining us. Weigh in on that piece, because it speaks volumes to me.
Judge Ashley, thank you for having me. This has been just a horrific case to follow, and I have begun reviewing some of the 314 Moscow Police Department supplements in this case. It's clear this was an extensive, voluminous investigation, but what we're starting to see here is in the course of the Moscow Police Department's investigation, they did learn that some of the victims prior to the incident had observed a stranger in the neighborhood, someone watching them from the hill in their backyard. They came home once to find the door off the hinges, or swinging on the hinges. It's a little hard to tell what the damage was to the door. So it's really, as Jack observed, this is just one of the worst cases that you hope you never see. Honestly, it called to mind for me a lot of the details of the Jeffrey McDonald trial years ago, in terms of the scene in the house when the officers arrived, and the descriptions were just horrific. And as the surviving family members, I don't know how you decide whether or not to read this information, because it is just nothing anyone should have to ever experience.
Yeah, it's brutal. Ted, I would love to just share a little bit more of what Corporal Corbin Smith also described, but then throw it to you, Ted, because you're there. You were there for the sentencing. You have interviewed individuals. You've worked on a documentary. So I'd love your reaction as we hear a little bit more about what's in this document. Smith also describing the scene in Maddie's bedroom, saying, the female laying on the left half of the bed as I looked at it from the doorway was unrecognizable. Her face was completely disfigured and was stabbed several times. I was unable to comprehend exactly what I was looking at while trying to discern the nature of the injuries. The second female on the right half of the bed had multiple stab wounds. The comforter was soaked in blood and a pool of blood was still present. Ted, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you know what? I read that for the first time a couple hours ago live with Jack, and it was hard to read. When you think about Kaylee and the condition of her body and her face, unrecognizable, this is a police officer who's in there to investigate. And through his words, after he goes back to the department to type up his report, it's still vivid. Like it's vivid and it's heartbreaking. If I'm the Gonzalez family, this makes me even more mad at what that monster did to my daughter.
Yeah.
Jack, we talked about it a couple hours ago. That scene was something else. And then, you know, they've got the lens of investigator, police officer, but boy, you could train all you want. If you're a cop in Moscow, Idaho, this is not something you're coming across on a daily, monthly, even career basis. You know, this is a once in a lifetime.
Ted and Judge Ashley, when we train for these, and when officers have trained for this sort of thing, you want to believe they went to the academy thinking they'll be ready for this. They've gone through every piece of training you can imagine, trying to be prepared for something like this. Nothing will prepare you for an incident like this. Nothing at all. And what makes this so particularly challenging, difficult for officers like this is that they have to step into an impossible environment and they can't make a mistake. They can't make a mistake because 2 years later, or 3 years later, somebody like me, as a criminal defense attorney, is going to cross-examine them on everything that they have ever done. But let's make it much more complicated than that. They now have to absorb all of that trauma, all of the specifics, the minutia of that room, the minutia of the defensive wounds across and cuts through their hands and into their arms and into their legs and across their necks, and they need to remember it. And they need to memorize it so they can go back and lay it out exactly. And then even worse, they have to remember it 2 and 3 years later. So when they sit in that jury box and they sit in that witness box and they stare at the jury, they can bring that nightmare to them because you have to compel a jury to make the right decision. And so what we're asking from our law enforcement and from our experts in cases like these is to live and relive and hold on to the most brutal memories they may ever see for years and years at a time. And that's one of the other sets of victims that we haven't even talked about. The families, yes, they're the worst. Those who lost their lives, those are even more worse. But let's talk about the people who had to walk in the room afterward and had to try to help pick up those pieces. They are also victims in a case like this.
You know, Jack, I agree with you, they're victims, but I have to say, reading many of these documents, I've not yet read them all, I've read a lot of them. This law enforcement team, to walk in and then have that description of Kaylee being unrecognizable in her face, and yet they stood on that and did everything they were supposed to do a thorough, good, complete investigation, not allowing anybody to come into the crime scene. I could go on. And specifically, the document goes on to say this, that this same corporal observed very large footprints in the snow, used a tape measure, and the shoe size measured approximately 13.5 to 14 inches. So, Phil, here they are describing the horrific scene they encounter with these victims in a community, college town, that is safe. And there are not these kinds of murders ever. And yet, they go to the next step and say, here's what I saw, here's the investigation, I'm gonna do my job in spite of that trauma.
Judge Ashley, that's a great point. And I made a reference to the Jeffrey McDonald trials a few minutes ago, but that is one way this case is much different. The investigation, just from the little bit I've seen, appears to have been conducted very well from the beginning. And, you know, even complete with you, again, going back to some of those vivid details, officers having to cordon off one of the dogs and then remove the dog from the house, take the dog to the Humane Society, and still proceed with their investigation, maintain their professionalism, maintain their composure. From what I've seen in the reports thus far, it's frankly impressive, and I've seen a lot of homicide investigations. The work that was put into this case by the Moscow Police Department, I haven't reviewed everything yet, but it does seem to have started very well, and I think that is it's all credit to the Moscow Police Department and the local authorities, and it's probably why, a big reason why, the defense decided to try to settle this case on the eve of trial.
And yet, if I might, if we can recall, remember the extraordinary pressure that the police department and other public officials were under at the time because they weren't, quote unquote, doing anything. Remember what they couldn't find, and then there were outside forces coming in saying, what about this, 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 and this? And then there's people from the blogosphere who've been coming in. There are those people too. Imagine what it is to be an officer who's done all this, the investigation that's being done, and you're being pillared in the press. And the thing is you can't respond because your job is to come in and do your job.
I agree, Jack. And
Absolutely,
yeah, go ahead, Ted.
Go ahead. No, well,
Yeah,
I was just going to say, you're spot on. If you think about the armchair quarterbacks, the internet sleuths, and the general public, people that were living in that area, they were scared, and rightfully so, that there was this, and he was this homicidal maniac out loose. Not the day after, not 2 days after, but recall, this was weeks. It went weeks and weeks where there was no arrest, and students flocked out of the university. Parents came and got their kids. The fear. And it was all, at some point, it turned a little, and it was, to Jack's point, it was all these cops don't know what they're doing. They were hard at work, and knowing the puzzle they solved on the back end, wow, they did a fantastic job. Finish your thought, Phil, and then we'll get a break.
Yeah, Ted, I agree. And I think, Jack, you know this, nobody gets into this business to be liked. Whether you're investigating these cases, prosecuting these cases, or defending these cases, you know, the armchair quarterbacks come out of the woodwork, and you do have to maintain your professionalism, stay focused on the task at hand, and keep your priorities straight. And it does appear that the Moscow Police Department did that in this case. And I think going back to some of the vivid details that we were talking about at the beginning of this segment, I think this is also a very good reason why this case settled, because even though some of the families of the victims were objecting to the settlement, I thought Prosecutor Bill Thompson's statements at the sentencing hearing were really spot on. And Judge Hippler in this case, who, again, I've said it before, he kept it on a tight leash from the beginning, and I think the resolution here was really remarkable, because there are so many ways these cases can go wrong.
Yeah.